Back Better agenda. Eli Lilly and Company CEO Dave Ricks is here to talk about the potential impact on funding research and innovation in Indiana and beyond. And the Purdue Foundry launching a competitive business building initiative called Boost. Managing Director Bill Arnold explains how the 10-week program can strengthen businesses. Plus,
I'm Mary Rachel Redman. Behind me, the beautiful Indiana Landmarks headquarters, still standing thanks to her. I'll have part 2 of my sit-down interview with former First Lady Judy O'Bannon coming up.
Details on those stories and much more ahead on this edition of Inside Indiana Business. Hello and welcome to Inside Indiana Business. I'm Gary Dick. It is estimated that Americans pay 2 to 3 times more for their prescription drugs than people in other countries. Nearly 1 in 4 struggle to afford prescription drugs. Now, the Biden administration wants to lower prescription drug costs by allowing Medicare to negotiate prices. But what could that mean for consumers and companies like Eli Lilly and Company? For some answers, I'm pleased to be joined by Lilly Chairman and CEO Dave Ricks, who's coming to us from Lilly's corporate headquarters in downtown Indianapolis. Dave, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Gary. Great to be on today.
Well, let's talk about this. Essentially, is part of the Biden agenda, healthcare agenda, that would allow the government to negotiate Medicare pricing. The administration says, hey, it's going to lower prices, which is needed. You and others in the industry say this amounts to price controls. Explain.
Yeah, that's right, Gary. What's being proposed now is an alarming policy shift as part of this reconciliation package, the president's agenda, which we oppose. We agree that Americans pay too much out of pocket for their medicines, but we don't agree on the reason. We feel like here in the U.S., because of a market-based pricing system for drugs, we've been able to, over the last, in my career, attract really the bulk of the industry's investment into the United States. Now, 80% of all R&D dollars in pharmaceuticals are spent in the United States. Almost every major pharmaceutical company globally has a presence here. And the benefits of that are not just on jobs and growth of our economy, but also on our ability to produce innovation when it matters most. And that was on display, I think, during this pandemic, where 5 out of the 6 approved drugs to treat COVID are American inventions, and all 3 of the vaccines we have are from American companies. So I don't think that's an accident. It's because we have this great industry. But that's supported by a market-based pricing system that allows innovation to capture value, and then we reinvest that value into future R&D projects. That's how the system works. Yeah. What's broken is what patients pay out of pocket, but we see that as an insurance design problem. And so we'd like Congress to focus on that problem, not really breaking apart the innovation model that's been built up so carefully here in the United States.
Yeah, this is a fluid situation, of course. We don't know exactly how it's going to end up. But as you look at the situation now and this pricing issue and what the administration wants, what, in your view, could be the potential impact for the industry, but specifically for Lilly, 10,000 employees here in Indiana?
Well, what we all agree on is that we should change the benefit designs so that patients' percent of the drug cost comes down. And I think consumers agree with that, all businesses agree with that, and the administration agrees with that. We'd like to start with the Medicare benefit for seniors, and the industry is willing to help pay our fair share to improve that benefit for America's seniors. But what's been proposed by the Finance Budget Committee, led by Bernie Sanders, and now in the House, is something well beyond the cost to fund that change, but extracting roughly $700 billion with a B over the next 10 years from the U.S. pharmaceutical industry, and using it to invest in other programs like electric battery subsidies and community college support. Those might be fine priorities, but in doing so, funding that out of our industry, you're really going to destroy the American innovation system that has really created this gem of our economy. Lilly's an example of that. And I think viewers here know the company's been doing well. We're thriving here in Indiana. And a cut like is being proposed would have about a 40% reduction in our U.S. revenues. There's no way we could just absorb that. We would have to make significant changes to our operations. The most important being reducing our R&D spending. This year, we'll likely spend about $7 billion on R&D, and those are for cures and treatments that don't exist yet. Unfortunately, we'd have to cut that pretty dramatically, and that means less growth for the company in the future and fewer jobs, probably locally, as well as fewer cures for the diseases of tomorrow. And we think that's just the wrong path.
Okay, Dave, only have about 40 seconds here, but as you look at the state of the company now, how things are, I know as we were talking off camera, you are looking at potentially growing, expanding. That includes here in Indiana?
Absolutely. We're in an exciting place because we've been able to invest in R&D. Today's medicines support tomorrow's cures. And we've been productive. We've got new medicines coming for obesity, for diabetes, for cancers. It's an exciting time, and we would love to grow the company here in Indiana. That won't be possible if this big Build Back Better package goes through. So we want to let everyone know, let your Congress people know you're not for that supporting innovation in America is important. And Lilly enjoys the benefits of that. We'd like to keep building here in Indiana.
The drug pricing issue continues to be a hot-button issue on Capitol Hill and beyond. Dave Ricks, the CEO at Eli Lilly and Company. Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Gary. Take care.
All right. Well, my guest on the next Business and Beyond podcast, he grew up in Greene County, Owensburg, Indiana. His yard actually butted up to the Crane Naval Surface Warfare Center. John Michael Gliva, or more commonly known as JMV, has been a mainstay on Indianapolis Sports Talk Radio for nearly 20 years, hosting The Drive with JMV during afternoons on Indianapolis radio for more than a decade. One of his most memorable interviews, former IU coach Kelvin Sampson in the mid-2000s.
At the very end, he said this, and this is a quote. He said, "John, you know what we got to realize? We got to realize that we have to have a big layer of thick skin, both of us." And that was that. He hung up.
Interesting conversation, some good stories with JMV starting Monday on the next edition of the Business and Beyond podcast. To check it out, go to InsideIndianaBusiness.com and click on the subscribe tab. A big opportunity coming for Midwest entrepreneurs. More on the Purdue Foundry's Boost Accelerator initiative and how it's aiming to strengthen businesses when we come back. It's time to go inside innovation, brought to you by Allegion, pioneering safety. Well, the mission of the Purdue Foundry is to enable Purdue startups to improve the world. The Foundry has launched more than 340 startups, raised more than $340 million in non-diluted funds, and invested more than $10 million. And I'm pleased to welcome Managing Director Bill Arnold to the show to tell us more about a new 10-week business building initiative that the Foundry is launching. Bill, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks a lot, Gary. Thanks for having us on.
Absolutely. I mentioned some stats there. The Purdue Foundry has really been pretty remarkable in terms of the impact. Give us the kind of the business model, if you will, what the Purdue Foundry is all about.
Yeah, so we're really about trying to help entrepreneurs, people who are trying to solve real problems in the market, get a notion of whether or not the idea that they're working on is worth pursuing.
Yep.
And if it's not, let's not do that. Let's do something else. So that's really been our sort of mantra for the last 8 years, which, as you pointed out, has generated 340 plus companies.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about this newest initiative, Bill, Boost. 10-week program, brand new. What's the idea all about?
So Boost is really it really came out of the 8 years worth of work that we've done so far, which is really, we've generated a lot of companies, but we wanted to see if we could help those companies grow more quickly and make a bigger impact. And in order to do that, they needed some deeper programming than what we'd been offering. And we wanted to incentivize that work with some additional funding that could help them make more progress more quickly.
Yeah, and again, these companies, these are in the earliest stages, right?
earliest stages, the people that we're looking for to be part of the Boost program, they probably know that there's a real problem that they're solving. We'd really love them to know that the market wants a solution and is willing to pay for it. But we want them not to have raised any capital yet. We'd really like to be first money in.
Yeah. Okay. Talk about how this is going to work and what you're going to have a pitch competition. You're going to make selections and have that first cohort. What those who are selected to participate, what are they going to do? What are they going to get?
Right. So we're really trying to generate a lot of applications and get down to 10 teams that will be part of the accelerator program. Those teams will get a $5,000 grant each to help them progress through the program. It's 10 weeks of content spread over a 16-week time period, culminating in a pitch competition with outside investors judging whether or not they're investable. If the outside investors say they're investable, we'll write them a check for $25,000.
So yeah, I guess you could say this is an example of the Purdue Foundry putting its money where its mouth is, right?
That is a perfect summation, Gary. That's what we believe we're doing. We say our programming makes a difference. Let's see if it's provable.
Yeah. Hey, a quick question as we wrap up. But coming out of the pandemic here, any general thought or where the innovation economy is and what you're hearing from startups who've been impacted certainly by the pandemic, but coming out of the pandemic, how things are?
Yeah, there's been huge impacts, and all across the economy and every industry, there's been impacts. But in our industry, so much of it is spending time having one-on-one conversations with people, getting in a room, pitching your idea. What we've found is the people who can take advantage of our services are actually global. They're not just in West Lafayette, Indiana. And people have been consuming our services during the pandemic that we've never been able to provide services to before. And our startups are able to get more accessibility to venture capitalists, angel investors, because of the meeting structure.
Very good.
So we think all that's going to continue forward.
Very good. Boost, Big Business Accelerator Initiative, October 18, the deadline to get your application in. Bill Arnold from the Purdue Foundry. Bill, thanks for joining us. We'll look forward to following the progress.
Great. Thanks so much for having me, Gary.
All right. We'll give her an old rundown Indiana landmark, and Judy O'Bannon will go to work to save it. Mary Rachel Redmond gets the former First Lady's take on Hoosier history, preservation, and why it's important in this week's Around Indiana. Here's what's making news now around Indiana. Well, most Hoosiers remember Judy O'Bannon as Indiana's First Lady, but the impact she's had on the state reaches far beyond just her time in the governor's residence. Around Indiana reporter Mary Rachel Redmond joins us now with part 2 of her sit-down with this Hoosier living legend. Mary Rachel.
Thanks, Gary. Well, as I found out, Judy O'Bannon is more than just a living legend. She's an amazing teacher. I thought historic preservation was just simply saving old buildings, but through several of our conversations on the phone and during this interview, she opened my eyes to what historic preservation really means and why it's important, especially in Indiana.
I love old shoes.
Yes.
These are from Paris. These are from Nepal. These are from the Goodwill. This is Indonesia. Uniqueness and character.
2 qualities Indiana's former First Lady has in spades.
Old buildings are like old ladies. You got to do something to hold them up, So the sound.
For the better part of a half-century, Judy O'Bannon has been nothing short of a hero in the fight for historic preservation in Indiana, even if she doesn't want to admit it.
I'm not a pioneer in preservation. People were always trying to save what told them the stories of their grandparents and their heritage. People want to have meaning, life to have permanence, and life as we know it and buildings as we know it don't always have permanence. You look at architecture, it's like reading a book. You can read what was important to people, what they didn't care about, what they needed, what they had at hand, so you can understand what's in you It's in the DNA, but it's in the experiences of those who raised you or are around you. For instance, if I look at the Athenaeum, I learn a whole lot about my German ancestry. If I look at Indiana Avenue and know about the jazz joints that were there, it tells me a lot about people who immigrated here from the South and joined together with music as their bond. I understand myself, and I don't feel threatened by things that are different.
While some argue historic preservation is frivolous, Judy argues saving these pieces of the past can define the future of a community and even a generation.
To just say price tag is the most important thing is short-sighted. There's a richer fabric in life than just the cost. I think the cost, when you tear it down and just put all new that looks alike, you lose your individuality. You lose that sense of pride. This is my people, this is our town, and you end up with less meaningful life. That those old buildings really speak to you of the solidness of your community.
Now we rewind to 1996. And you might recognize this hat from Frank O'Bannon's run for governor.
I met Frank O'Bannon when we were in school, and a belief that with hard work we can make Indiana a better place to live.
What is your fondest memory living in the governor's mansion?
The best memories were traveling around the state. The governor's residence was the state's living room. I very much felt that was a way to give people an opportunity to feel, gee, I went there and I had a gift worthy of using it at the governor's residence. Do you think that doesn't affect some little kid who thought they were nothing but a throwaway? I think so, and that's a privilege you get to provide that.
What do you hope that your lasting legacy, what do you want people to remember?
I don't even think about that.
What do you want people to remember you for?
Well, I don't want them to think I was a louse.
But there's no question this former First Lady has a deep love for her fellow Hoosiers and the state of Indiana.
The camera.
That I respected them and appreciated them and wanted to pull them into the game. I was just lucky and had a very lucky ride of a life.
Isn't she just great? I mean every word of it when I say it was truly an honor to have the opportunity to spend so much time with one of our state's favorite first ladies. Her wisdom is really something we can all learn from. You'll be able to watch my entire interview with Judy O'Bannon on our website, InsideIndianaBusiness.com. Gary?
All right, Mary Rachel, thanks. Great story. Well, also making headlines around Indiana this week, a Kansas-based pet food company has announced plans to expand in Wayne County. Hill's Pet Nutrition says it will invest more than $17 million to expand capacity in Richmond and create nearly 65 jobs over 2 years. Hill says the first phase of the expansion begins right away and would be complete early next year, and it includes transitioning operations from 5 to 7 days per week. Phase 2 will add a new packaging line by the end of 2023. Officials in Ligonier say new development on the city's south side could help drive business growth. A mixed-use development is planned for a nearly 120-acre property that would include industrial and commercial space. The mayor there says the city hopes to attract a new hotel as well. And we will be back with much more right after this. Stay with us. Well, the Eiteljorg Museum of American Indians and Western Art is in the home stretch of a $55 million capital and endowment campaign. The goal of Project 2021, Telling Your Stories, to raise an additional $6 million by May of next year. And I'm pleased to welcome to the show, as always, Eiteljorg CEO John Van Osdal, and to talk about the goals of the campaign and what is really a transformation at that very important museum. John, as always, welcome.
Thank you, Gary.
Well, let's talk about this. Very ambitious capital campaign over a number of years, a capital and endowment campaign, part of a strategic process. I know you're very happy about where you are. You set out the goal of 55. You're in the final stretch.
We are. We're trying to raise an additional $40 million for our endowment to sustain our operations into the future. and about $15 million for some capital projects that'll really enhance what we offer to the public.
Well, let's talk about the substantial nature of this campaign and what actually it's funding. I think transformational is an overused word, but I think accurate in this stage. There are a lot of areas of the Idle Jorg that haven't changed since opening in 1989. Talk about how this campaign is going to change that and some of the improvements, the enhancements that are going to be made there at the museum.
Well, the revision of the permanent galleries is core to this project. That includes the Western American galleries, which were remodeled in 2018. And the capstone project will be the complete revision of the upper floor where the Native American galleries are. And as you said, those largely haven't been touched since we opened the building in 1989. So it's really time for a change.
Yeah, and you've got, like I said, so many areas of the museum are being impacted by this. Among them, the children's area and educational components. How will that change in terms of the experience of young people coming to the Idle Jorg?
Well, this is near and dear to me. In 2005, when we expanded the museum, we added the Education Center, the Nine Mason Pulliam Education Center. And in 2010, we added an interactive exhibit called the Arbiana's Western Family Experience. And it's about real people, real stories, real families, and their histories connected to the West and Native America. And we're completely updating that. There are 5 new family stories. It's all interactive. We've opened the space up, and it includes a library and resource centers that teachers and students have access to. So books, periodicals, computer stations, hands-on kits. It was a hit before, but it's going to feel like it's twice as big, and there's so much more to do in the revision. Yeah,
before we wrap up, John, I think I should mention the Idle Jorg is such an asset to the community, to our quality of life, quality of place, and attracting talent here. But to raise these funds, to make these improvements, to go through the pandemic without laying off employees, really a testament to what's going on, I think, at the Idle Jorg.
Well, I agree that it's what the Idle Jorg is choosing to do, but we live in an incredibly generous community, and I have to thank them. The foundations and the individuals who support places like the Idle Jorg stepped up even in bigger ways during the pandemic, and we were able to continue the progress of this campaign. So we've maintained our staff base, haven't had to let anyone go due to COVID, and we've come out of this in very good shape, and can't wait till 2022 and we finish all these projects and open them for the public to enjoy.
A lot of people will be looking forward to that. John Van Osdal, the president and CEO at the Idle Jorg. John, congratulations on the campaign. We look forward to seeing the finished product.
Thank you so much, Gary.
All right. Well, coming up in our next half hour, the impact of diabetes in underserved communities, what Eli Lilly and Company is doing to help in 3 specific Indianapolis neighborhoods. Well, there is an alarming gap in life expectancy in central Indiana. Residents in Fishers live 17 years longer than Hoosiers who live less than 20 miles away in one of the most disadvantaged areas in Indianapolis. It's a stat that inspired Eli Lilly and Company to invest even more in its hometown. And Business of Health reporter Kylie Valletta has more. Kylie.
Well, thank you, Gary. Just a few years ago, the life expectancy gap was 14 years between neighborhoods in Indy's urban core compared to the northern suburb of Fishers. That's when Lilly invested $7 million to launch the Diabetes Impact Project, because these neighborhoods of color also have higher rates of diabetes. Then a report in August showed the life expectancy gap had grown even wider, now to 17 years. It inspired Lilly to get even more aggressive and invest an extra $5 million in the Diabetes Impact Project. Joining me now to tell us how Lilly is expanding their work is Courtney Roberts, Director of Global Health Equity Partnerships at Lilly. Hi, Courtney. Thanks for being on the show today.
Hi, Kylie. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's start with the Diabetes Impact Project. It got underway in 2018. Just give us an overview of what the project is.
The Diabetes Impact Project Indianapolis Neighborhoods, also known as DIPIN, is a partnership to address diabetes in 3 Indianapolis neighborhoods where life expectancy is among the lowest in the city, where 83% of residents are people of color, and where diabetes rates are nearing 20%, which is almost twice the national average. It was initially launched in 2018 with the mantra, "Where you live should determine how long you live," in response to the life expectancy study by Fairbanks School of Public Health that Gary just referenced. That data showed us that there was a life expectancy gap of 14 years between the northern suburbs of the city and the urban core of the city. And some zip codes right here in this city had the life expectancy of Iraq and Uzbekistan. So by addressing diabetes in some of these communities, which is where Lilly has deep expertise, we felt like we could play a role in closing that gap. DIPIN is a multifaceted partnership led by the 3 communities in themselves in the city of Indianapolis. It provides a holistic approach to diabetes prevention and control that includes neighborhood residents as well as community health workers.
So Lilly has really intensified its efforts now, investing an extra $5 million in the project. A lot has changed since 2018 when this project started. So explain why Lilly wanted to reinvest in it.
This investment makes sense right at this particular moment in time for a few reasons, Kylie. First, the updated data that the life expectancy gap has widened even further from 14 years when we launched the partnership now to 17 years. According to this data, people in the DIPIN neighborhoods can expect to live nearly 17 years less than people who live 20 miles north. And secondly, our decision to reinvest was also influenced by COVID, which has only illuminated health disparities. We know that people of color are experiencing a higher burden of cases, hospitalizations, and deaths. We know that people with underlying medical conditions like diabetes are more likely to have serious complications from COVID. And while we don't yet know the impact of COVID on life expectancy in these communities, we can only guess that it's likely to widen given what we know about the virus. And third, changing the health of an entire community takes time. This is not just an extended investment in funding. It's also an extended investment of time. And health inequities didn't occur overnight. And turning the tide on that doesn't happen overnight either. This new investment is crucial to achieving long-term, sustainable, community-level change.
And really at the heart of the change is Lilly's focusing on social determinants of health. Can you explain how this program really gets at the heart of the social determinants of health?
Social determinants of health are the conditions of a person's life, the conditions where they live and work and learn, and they affect both health and quality of life. Social determinants of health are at the center of this work. We cannot address diabetes without also addressing those issues that our neighbors worry about every single day. Lack of access to fresh food, safety, economic security. These issues contribute to diabetes and impact a person's ability to manage diabetes. A major focus of this next phase of this partnership will be on social determinants of health. The residents of these neighborhoods will look at tackling barriers of food access, stress and mental health, as well as opportunities and access to physical activity.
And just I'm sorry, go ahead. You go ahead.
And because of this focus, this work actually has the potential to impact every single resident of these communities, whether they have diabetes or not. And we know that we can't change the health of these communities without also addressing the totality of people's lives.
And only about 20 seconds left, but I want you to mention the community health workers, how they're embedded in the neighborhood. Can you explain how they help guide some of the change?
Yes, we listen to and trust those closest to us, our neighbors, our faith leaders, our friends, and this is where the community health worker comes in. The community health worker isn't a doctor or a nurse. They're someone who lives in the community, who makes door-to-door visits to neighborhood residents. They know the barriers and worries that the residents face. And over the last 2 years, community health workers have been embedded into these neighborhoods. And while much of that work has focused on diabetes treatment and prevention, the community health workers are also helping individuals living with diabetes address those social determinants of health that might be contributing to their diabetes.
All right, Courtney, thanks for sharing more about the program. Good luck moving forward.
Thanks, Kylie.
Gary, back to you.
All right, Kylie, thank you. Well, Franklin College has put an emphasis on diversity since it opened its doors in 1834. It was the first college in Indiana to go co-ed. More than 950 students attend Franklin, and in 2020, in the midst of the pandemic, the school welcomed its largest incoming class in 5 years. Franklin College preparing to inaugurate its 17th president later this month, a man who's been at the school for nearly 40 years. And I'm pleased to be joined by Carey Prather, who has served as president since January of 2020. And in a short time, he's made some very significant moves in many areas. Carey, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Gary. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, you will be inaugurated as Franklin's 17th president, but you are by no means a stranger to Franklin College. Very well known, have been there for some 40 years, including many years as the well-known basketball coach there with 500-plus wins over the course of your tenure.
It's been a wonderful place to call home. We set down roots here. My wife served on the faculty of the education department for 23 years. Both of our children are alumni, and it's been a wonderful place for the Prather family and a wonderful place for us to call home. Well,
you have wasted no time. You've not let any grass grow under your feet in assuming the president's role. A number of initiatives you have shepherded in your short time in office now, among them a Center for Tech Innovation. Talk about that Center for Tech Innovation, why it's important, why technology and innovation are important to the Franklin College experience.
Well, we were the beneficiary of a grant from Lilly Endowment, Inc. Through their Charting the Future grant program. And the proposal that we put forward was to encompass the realm of digital fluency across the curriculum. So if you think about the liberal arts core that all of our students benefit from, and on top of that, then the content-specific education in their particular major, we felt like the next cutting-edge aspect to that educational experience should be the digital world, proficiency in all of the applications that apply to the area of study that they may be pursuing, and ultimately the careers that they will pursue. So we do an annual check-in with our alumni out in the workforce. We regularly check in at Eli Lilly, at Salesforce, at Cummins, to huddle up with our alums and talk about how best to prepare our students for their careers out in the world. And obviously, we benefit from the fact that Indianapolis is an exploding tech sector here. And this has enabled us to really bring into the curriculum all of those technological applications that benefit our students in preparing them for graduate school and for the workplace.
Yeah, certainly higher education changing across the board, including liberal arts institutions. Interesting, you have entered into the first articulation agreement, this one with Ivy Tech Community College. Why do that?
Well, we are embarked on an enrollment growth strategy, and one of those is to be more proactive in the student market where students access higher eds at different entry points. So certainly Ivy Tech has expanded the community college aspect of its work, enabling students to enter higher ed and prepare themselves ultimately for a bachelor's degree. Where we found synergy with Ivy Tech was in their liberal arts ASAP program. So it's a specific cohort of students that completes a rigorous year-round program of studies that enables them then to transfer into Franklin seamlessly and complete the last 2 years of their bachelor's degree here. So we're very excited about that, and we were pleased to have President Ellspermann and many of the Ivy Tech colleagues on campus in July to celebrate that agreement.
Carey, unfortunately, we're running out of time, but quickly, the Johnson Memorial Health Athletics Annex is another addition there. Interesting contribution, too, from IU football coach Tom Allen to make that happen.
Yes, our partnership with Johnson Memorial Health has just been wonderful, and they've been great partners in every aspect of what we do, including our health sciences graduate programs and certainly through the COVID experience. But in this particular case, they've helped fund an annex for practice facilities for our 21 men's and women's sports.
Yep.
We've been able to add the weight room through the generosity of Coach Tom Allen in honor of his father, who's a 61 graduate of Franklin, who helped bring strength training to the campus when he was a football player here.
Oh, that's great. Carrie Prather, lots more we can talk about. I know an esports program you've instituted. You'll be inaugurated into the president's office October 30. New president of Franklin College. Carrie, thanks very much. Good luck going forward.
Thanks very much for having me, Gary.
All right. Well, this week, Bloomington-based business accelerator The Mill says a new federal award will help it launch a second investment fund for early-stage startups. The organization says it has received a nearly $400,000 grant from the U.S. Economic Development Administration to establish a new fund on top of its existing Flywheel fund. That second fund, called Turban, will focus on attracting seasoned investors to make bigger investments. Both funds will continue to invest in Indiana-based startups. Executive Director Pat East says the new grant will allow the Mill to accelerate efforts to cultivate the next generation of angel investors and fuel innovative new companies. Well, both the men's and women's NCAA Final Fours in the same city on the same weekend. It could happen by the end of the decade. We get details on the potential game plan from NCAA Senior Vice President of Basketball, Dan Gavitt. Well, the Indianapolis-based National Collegiate Athletic Association announced last week that it is exploring the possibility of hosting both the Division I men's and women's tournaments, basketball tournaments, in the same city. A move that certainly could have implications for Indianapolis. Bill Benner has more in this week's Inside Indiana Sports. Bill.
Gary, thanks. The announcement comes on the heels of an in-depth gender equity study following the men's and women's tournaments held in Indy and San Antonio, respectively, this past spring. And joining us today to discuss where it all might lead is the NCAA Senior Vice President for Basketball, Dan Gavitt. And Dan, welcome back to the program, and thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Bill. Always great to be with you.
Well, and again, after the tournaments last year, both held in the same site, San Antonio, Indianapolis, some inequities were pointed out, and the NCAA went to work, and they've formed a gender equity study committee, and one of the recommendations would be to bring future Final Fours to the same city, which would be an extraordinary development. Just talk a little bit about who participated in that study and how it all came together.
We hired a law firm, Kaplan, Hecker, and Fink, to do the independent review of gender equity differences, and they provided a very extensive report that was released publicly into the NCAA membership back in early August, and we've been going through their recommendations and evaluating them, we being the NCAA membership, and have already made many changes they've recommended, and especially in planning for the 2022 Women's Basketball Championship, and continue to evaluate and assess other recommendations that would be more long-term, like the combined Final Four concept.
I was interested in the reaction from the Women's Basketball Coaches Association. Some were saying we prefer being at a standalone venue, and others obviously were saying bring it on, this would be a great thing for the women's sport. Generally, how would you characterize the reaction you've gotten so far, Dan?
Well, you know, Bill, this is not a new idea, a new concept to combine the Final Fours in the same city on the same weekend. It was very much considered back in 2014 as a result of a white paper that Big East Commissioner Val Ackerman wrote and recommended. It had champions back then, but not enough consensus to move forward with the idea. So it's a renewed interest. It is somewhat of a polarizing idea, though. There are those that feel very strongly on both sides of the issue that it could be great for both the women's and men's championships, and others that feel like having some independence for those events is a better outcome. So the basketball committees have been working on considering it. Announced last week they made the commitment to honor their commitment to the future Final Four hosts, which are awarded out through 2026 for both the women's and men's Final Fours. And if a combined Final Four is something that they want to explore, that it would happen sometime 27 or beyond. So the question is still up in the air. It hasn't been determined yet. I think they're working on what the goal would be now of a combined Final Four, to be very clear about the strategic goal of that idea. And then if it is embraced by the membership, we'd consider it in future years, 27 or beyond.
Well, Dan, as we wrap up, another of the interesting variables, and using Indianapolis as an example, if you bring both Final Fours in the same city, Lucas Oil Stadium for the men, perhaps Gainbridge Fieldhouse for the women, or perhaps both in the same venue, just if you would address that variable.
Sure, Bill. Well, I think it's more likely that we would use two different venues. The schedules are very challenging with team preparation, practice, and shoot-arounds and the like. And in order to make sure that the team experience is equitable and excellent for both women's and men's participants, it's more likely we would use a really great arena like Gainbridge Fieldhouse and a great stadium like Lucas Oil Stadium in the same city to provide that incredible experience, the equitable experience we would seek. The detail to be determined. It's a great question. We haven't really kind of come to that conclusion yet, but I'd say it's more likely that we would look in that situation to do that.
Well, Dan Gavitt of the Ncaa, we certainly appreciate you coming on the program. It's a fascinating concept, and we eagerly await to see how it all unfolds, and we hope Indianapolis is part of it. Dan, great seeing you. Thanks.
Likewise. Thanks, Bill.
You got it. And Gary, back to you.
All right, Bill, thank you. One of the biggest sports voices in Indiana is my next guest on the Business and Beyond podcast. You probably know him as JMV, but this Greene County native grew up as John Michael Gliva. He's hosted the popular afternoon drive radio show The Ride with JMV since 2010. He opens up about why growing up in small town Indiana is still near and dear to his heart.
One general store, one in-town post office, a August celebration called Founders Day when the town was founded, riding bikes all over the place, finding a backyard to play baseball in, a little 2-on-2, 3-on-3, baseball, pitcher's hand, a full court basketball, playing basketball all the time. I grew up, I was lucky enough to grow up with a pool. We were the only one around that had an in-ground pool, so everybody ended up over at our house all the time, riding motorcycles my mom still lives there too. We have 40 acres that butts right up against Crane. The general store stuff was great because, it was straight out of Little House on the Prairie, because the Layman's General Store not only had, food, and they had the lift-up coolers where you got 16-ounce glass bottles out of. There was nothing like that, but they had like workwear and activewear and boots, and because back before, way back when Owensburg was founded, obviously in the late 1800s or whatever, that was the only place to go around where you could shop. So it had everything, and I wouldn't have traded those memories for the world because it was incredibly outstanding. I love my high school. I love Easton Green. I love it better as Eastern High School, not Easton Green, but I love Easton Green. I still have a ton of friends around there. If I really want to feel comfortable and kind of cut loose, that's where I go. With your friends down there. Not to say that I love having friends up here as well, but it's just a different level of comfort that you have. It's like a big family.
You're not going to want to miss my interesting conversation. Lots of great stories, too, with JMV starting Monday on the next edition of the Business and Beyond podcast. To check it out, go to InsideIndianaBusiness.com and click on the subscribe tab. Fall in Indiana, apple orchards, pumpkins, beautiful leaves, and pork. Yes, it's National Pork Month, Porktober. We'll show you where you can dine at some of the state's best tenderloin spots when we come back. Fall in Indiana drums up the thoughts of apple orchards, pumpkins, and the turning of leaves. But agriculture leaders say it's also a time to recognize the state's massive profile in the pork industry. Indiana, believe it or not, the fourth largest pork exporter in the country, generating some $377 million annually. The state marking National Pork Month by inviting Hoosiers to dine along the Tenderloin Lovers Trail. For more on Porktober and how it's designed to help Hoosier restaurants and the economy, I'm pleased to be joined by Indiana Destination Development Corporation Secretary and CEO Elaine Beadle. Elaine, as always, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Gary. Happy to be here.
Yeah, especially happy to celebrate Porktoberfest, right?
Yes.
Which is a new event. It's got a fun element, to be sure, but there's also an economic impact element as well. As I mentioned, Indiana, the fourth largest pork exporter in the country. It is big industry here with nearly $400 million generated annually, so very important to the economy.
Absolutely. We have 3,000 pork producers in the state of Indiana. And what better to celebrate pork than in Porktober, where we really talk about the breaded pork tenderloin, something that all of us enjoy. I mean, and the interesting thing about a pork tenderloin sandwich, you've got the pork, usually pounded, maybe breaded, and then deep fried. But after that, we've got 70 different restaurants on our trail that will put their own little secret ingredient to it. So each of them might be a little different, but they're all delicious.
Yeah, we'll talk about this because this is part of a strategy I think you have there at the Indiana Destination Development Corporation to support local restaurants, support local communities as well. You mentioned 70 restaurants participating along this Tenderloin Lovers Trail, and there's an incentive, right, for folks to get out there because there's a T-shirt if you sample a few of those restaurants.
Absolutely. Thanks to the Indiana Pork Producers Association, they're providing a free T-shirt. It's great. It's red. It's got a pork tenderloin on it. It calls it Indiana's Sandwich. And if you try 5 different restaurants on that pork tenderloin trail during the month of October, you'll get a free T-shirt. But even beyond that, what the pork producers Indiana pork producers are doing is they're actually giving $1,000 to the top 5 restaurants that have the most check-ins. And I can explain that in a minute as well. So it's not only do you get something for eating the pork tenderloin, that restaurants get something for producing them and being at the top of the list.
Right. A big boost, obviously, to restaurants who've had a very challenging time for the last 18 months or so. And you can find out more information on the T-shirt at visitindiana.com. Elaine, the impact I mentioned on the economy, but these communities too, a lot of communities increasingly, as you talk about agritourism, are looking at agritourism as a way to maybe, jumpstart their local economies.
Right. Well, the Indiana Culinary Trails Passport that anyone can sign up for free on visitindiana.com really is where you can see 21 different trails. We're doing this in partnership with the Indiana Foodways Alliance, and they basically curate the trails. And you have to be a locally owned restaurant to be on any of the 21 trails, a locally owned entity, and using locally grown ingredients in your product. And so it's all helping the community, the economy. And so it's important to do that because, as you said, we haven't quite fully recovered from the pandemic. We need to get people out there and help these family-owned businesses survive this and really start thriving again.
Yeah, you mentioned 21 trails from tenderloins to ice cream to breweries, distilleries. The Indiana Culinary Trails Passport, a way to get access to all of those. Elaine Beadle, Secretary and CEO at the Indiana Destination Development Corporation. Thanks for joining us on this very important initiative, part of a much broader initiative you're involved with. So thanks for joining us.
You're welcome, Gary. Thank you.
All right. Well, this week, a Terre Haute entrepreneur won the top prize in the inaugural Launchpad pitch competition in the Vigo County city. As a result of the win, Lakin Richardson will soon open her new business, Snapped, a selfie experience in downtown Terre Haute. Snapped is described as a selfie gallery in which customers of all ages can use rotating photo backgrounds, themed rooms, and more to take photos. Richardson says the business can be used for date nights, birthday parties, and other events. She also owns and operates Foam Homies, a party business in Terre Haute. Launchpad was established by the Terre Haute Chamber of Commerce, Launch Terre Haute, and West Central Indiana Small Business Development Center. And I'll be right back after this. Stay with us. Coming up next week, Indianapolis International Airport and Contour Airlines launching the first drive market flights out of Indianapolis. How demand for the daily nonstops to regional markets is taking off. We'll take you on a trip. Plus, nearly 2,000 Hoosier children under the age of 5 are blind or visually impaired. In the business of health, learn what visually impaired preschool services is doing to support these children and their families. Will also take you inside the Field House of the Future, Phase 2 of that project downtown. Thanks for joining us. I'm Gary Dick. Go out and make it a successful week.
Inside Indiana Business with Gary Dick is a production of Grow Indiana Media Ventures with support from WFYI Productions.